Hello everyone, welcome to session 2 of LTEC 654, Programming Games and Simulations. I want to begin by taking a quick look at the session 1 survey results. One of the questions asked, we had 17 responses, and one of the questions asked, I have experience building websites. And you can see here we have kind of a normal distribution, and I think this is important because it's really relevant experience. The distinction between the content of a website, how that content looks and is designed, and of course the technical implementation of all of that in the form of HTML, CSS, and perhaps even a little JavaScript is really relevant when thinking about programming games and simulations. So I hope you're heartened by that particular idea. The next question asked how many of you have experience designing games. You can see here most of you do not, and about half of you think you have some. I would encourage the folks on this side to share their insight and resources into the game design process as we move along. The third question asked whether or not you have experience programming computers. The majority of you disagreed. However, 4 of you, or about 24%, said that you do have some experience programming computers. So I would really encourage you folks to help out our newcomers as we begin to understand and explore different programming concepts. Because as you know, if you have some experience programming computers, the basic concepts are pretty much the same, regardless of what language or environment you're working in. And then finally, I asked whether or not you have experience using Godot, and the vast majority of you were very clear that you do not. So what's our initial focus going to be? Now, last week we talked about the interdisciplinary nature of what we're focusing on. And so we are going to begin this semester by really focusing on computer programming. Of course, I mentioned last week that we are thinking about programming games and simulations within the context of education. And our reading for this week really brought up an important debate. And I thought that was an appropriate place to start out because as you learn to program this semester, I want you to keep in mind the larger questions being asked about the role of computer programming and computational thinking in formal education. Do they belong in formal education? And if so, to what extent? Taking your first steps to learn computer programming, or if you already know about computer programming, trying to take those skills to the next level, you are going to have some insight into this ongoing debate that's happening really internationally, but certainly nationally as to the role of computer science in education. And that really brings us to the Albion article. Now, of course, Albion was really talking about Australia and the movement in Australia to integrate computer science education into the curriculum. But I like that article because I think it raises a number of important questions. First, he talks about the difference between programming and coding. Albion points out that those two terms are often used interchangeably to simply mean that techniques used to control digital technologies. He does point out that technically, coding is a subtask of programming. Programming encompasses all of the activities involved in specifying the logic involved in the solutions to problems, whereas coding is the process of expressing that logic using a language appropriate to the task and the technologies at hand. Albion also introduced us to the idea of computational thinking, and those are the thought processes involved in expressing solutions as computational steps or algorithms that can be carried out by a computer. And we're going to get more and more exposure to both coding and computational thinking as we begin to build games and simulations. Now, Albion also talked about quite extensively about the varying opinions about the role of programming, coding, and computational thinking as they relate to formal education. He said the overly positive response is that coding is super important, that it's going to save national economies and lead everyone to prosperity. He contrasts that overly positive response with an overly negative response. This idea that coding is difficult and has little value. People in this camp argue that society has enough programmers already, and there are too few teachers to teach the subject properly anyway. And so for that reason, we should keep programming and coding out of schools. Albion argues that there's actually the sane response is more middle of the road. And he points out that yes, society needs coders, but there are also many other roles, such as designers and marketers and analysts that go along with jobs associated with computer science and programming. He also argues that some understanding of coding and computational thinking is invaluable because it is the basis for understanding the risks and benefits of our technology-saturated lives. And in fact, knowing a little bit about coding and computational thinking provides a background for assessing existing solutions. It allows us to make more informed judgments and to suggest improvements about the ways technology and computer programs work. And Albion argues that it is a form of literacy that allows us to read and respond to the modern world more effectively. So that's a little bit of context that I want you to keep in mind as we are learning computer programming. With that, we're going to switch to our hands-on with Godot, and these are the topics we're going to talk about in our hands-on videos. First, we're going to learn how to start a Godot project. We're going to learn how to navigate Godot's interface. Then we're going to understand how to use nodes and adjust their properties in Godot. Then we'll learn how to combine those nodes into scenes. And finally, we're going to learn how to instantiate those scenes using code. And that, my friends, is quite a bit to cover in the second session of the semester. All right, we're out of time for now. Have a great week, and I'll see you in Canvas.